Kirk Douglas talks about the gentleman Ernest Borgnine was the rudest. Kirk Douglas was born with the name Isser Daniel Danilowitz on December 9, 1916 in Amsterdam, New York. Douglas was the son of very poor Jewish immigrants from what is Nobilaris. His early life was full of hardship and determination. He grew up in a small, crowded home without running water, and from a young age, he worked odd jobs to help support his large family. Despite the difficulties, Douglas had an unshakable ambition. He was driven by a desire to rise above his circumstances, and education became his ladder to a better life. After doing great in high school, he earned a scholarship to study Lawrence University and later attended the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in York City, where he practiced his craft and began to develop a commanding presence that would later make him a force in cinema. Douglas' acting career was interrupted by World War II, during which he served in the Navy as a communications officer. After the war, he returned to civilian life with renewed determination and began pursuing a career on stage and screen. His breakthrough came in 1946 with The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, where his portrayal of a morally complex district attorney caught Hollywoodization. From that moment on, his rise was meteoric. Throughout the 1950s and 1960 seconds, Kirk Douglas became synonymous with intensity, courage, and defiance. He wasn't just a matinee idol, he was a powerhouse of emotion and conviction. His chiseled features, piercing blue eyes, and gravelly voice made him an unmistakable screen presence, but it was his inner fire that truly set him apart. Some of his most memorable performances came in iconic films such as Champion 1949, which earned him his first Academy Award nomination and cemented his reputation as a formidable actor. In Ace in the Hole 1951, Douglas delivered a scathing portrayal of journalistic ambition, while The Bad and the Beautiful 1952 showcased his ability to play flawed, deeply human characters. Yet, it was his role as the rebellious slave-turned-revolutionary in Spartacus 1960 that became his defining moment. Not only did star in the film, but he also produced it through his company, Brenna Productions, named after his mother. Douglas's decision to hire blacklisted screen Dalton Trumbo was an act of moral courage that helped end the Hollywood blacklist, an event that changed the course of industry history. His words, "I am Spartacus," resonated on the screen as a declaration of defiance and unity. Off-screen, Douglas was as dynamic and determined as he was in camera. He was known for his intense work ethic, his sharp intelligence, and his fierce sense of independence. Though could be volatile, he was also deeply reflective and philosophical, often speaking about his immigrant background and the moral responsibilities of fame. He wrote several acclaimed autobiographies, including The Ragmanson, in which he candidly examined his triumphs and failings alike. Later in life, Douglas survived a near-fatal helicopter crash in 1991 and a debilitating stroke in 1996 that affected his speech. Rather than retreat from the public eye, he used these expenses to inspire others, continuing to appear at public events and advocate for charitable causes well into his 90s. His resilience became yet another symbol of his indomitable spirit. Kirk Douglas's legacy extended far beyond his filmography. He was a humanitarian who, together with his wife and Biden's, donated millions of dollars to educational, medical, and cultural institutions through the Douglas Foundation. Their generosity helped build playgrounds, hospitals, and Alzheimer's care facilities. He also endowed scholarships and supported causes promoting peace and understanding. His influence carried over to his family as well. His son, Michael Douglas, followed in his footsteps to become one of Hollywood's most respected actors, carrying forward the Douglas name with pride and success. Douglas received countless honors over his lifetime, including an honorary Academy Award in 1996 for 50 years as a creative and moral force in the motion picture community. He also received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States. When he turned 100 in 2016, the celebration was a testament to not just his longevity, but his profound impact on the entertainment world and beyond. Kirk Douglas's personal life was as dynamic and deeply human as his legendary career in Hollywood. His first marriage was to actress Diana Dill, a woman of grace, talent, and charm who met during the early years of his rise in the entertainment industry. The two were married on November 2, 1943, at a time when Douglas was still struggling to establish himself as a leading man in Hollywood. Their union symbolized hope and ambition in the midst of the uncertain years of World War II. Diana herself, an accomplished actress and model originally from Bermuda, was known for her poise and sophistication. Together they formed one of Hollywood's most photogenic young couples, often appearing in the social pages of theatre. Despite their glamorous publicimage, their marriage faced the typical strains that come with the demanding schedules and ambitions of two people in the entertainment world. Douglas' relentless drive to succeed and his rising fame often conflicted with the stability of domestic life. During their years together, the couple welcomed two sons, Michael Douglas and Joel Douglas, both of whom would go on to carve their own paths in the film industry. Michael, born in 1944, would become one of the most successful and respected actors and producers of his generation, eventually winning Academy Awards for both acting and producing. Joel, born in 1947, Chisato worked primarily behind the scenes, finding fulfillment in producing and managing film projects rather than performing. Kirk often spoke fondly of time when his sons were young, though he admitted in later interviews that his intense dedication to his career sometimes made him an absent father during those early years. The marriage between Kirk and Diane ultimately came to an end, and they officially divorced on February 23, 1951, after nearly 8 years together. Despite the separation, they maintained mutual respect and continued to share a bond through their sons, remaining connected as co-parents and later as proud grandparents to the growing Douglas family. After a few years off being single and a string of high-profile romances, Kirk Douglas found lasting love again with Anna Bidens, a German-born publicist and film producer who would become his lifelong partner and moral anchor. That was met in Paris in the early 1950s while Douglas was filming Act of Love. At first, Anne was unimpressed by the Hollywood star's advances and even turned him down for a date. But Kirk, known for his persistence both on and off screen, eventually won her over with his charm and sincerity. Their relationship blossomed slowly, but steadily built on mutual respect, intelligence, and humor, qualities that would sustain them through the many ups and downs of a life lived in the public eye. The couple married on May 29, 1954 in a quiet ceremony that marked the beginning of a partnership that would last for more than 6 decades, one of the longest and most enduring unions in Hollywood history. Together, Kirk and Anne had two sons, Peter Douglas and Eric Douglas. Peter, born in 1955, followed his father's footsteps into the film industry, building a successful career as a producer and filmmaker. His notable works included producing acclaimed television movies and films that often carried his father's influence in the themes of morality and perseverance. Eric, born in 1958, also pursued acting, appearing in several films and stage productions, though his career was overshadowed by personal struggles and health issues that sadly led to his untimely passing in 2004. Despite these family challenges, Kirk and Anne's marriage was a model of devotion and resilience. Anne stood by Kirk through every stage of his career, including his recovery from a near-fatal helicopter crash in 1991 and his difficult rehabilitation following a debilitating stroke in 1996. Kirk often credited Anne with saving his life both physically and emotionally, describing her as the steady force who helped him rediscover faith, compassion, and purpose. When Hollywood legend Kirk Douglas spoke candidly about his long career, he often surprised people with his honest reflections on those he admired and those who disappointed him. One of his most intriguing recollections was about Ernest Borgnine, the Oscar-winning actor known for his tough guy roles and toothy grin. While many fans knew Borgnine as a beloved star from Marty and McCallis Navy, Douglas offered a more nuanced perspective. Ernie was a gentleman in public, Douglas said, but there were moments when his temper could turn him into their rudest man on the set. This comment, coming from one of Hollywood's most respected figures, shed light on the complexity of Borgnine's personality and the tension that sometimes simmered behind the camera. Douglas explained that he first met Borgnine in the early 1950s, when both were rising stars struggling to find their place in the industry. He was a big man with an even bigger laugh, Douglas recalled. You couldn't help but like him at first meeting. But Hollywood has a way of revealing what people are really made of. Douglas admired Borgnine's talent and work ethic, but he also saw another side of the actor, a side that could be abrasive, impatient, and at times startlingly rude. He had a habit of cutting people off, Douglas said. If someone didn't measure up to his standards, he'd let them know in the most direct, humiliating way. Despite those moments, Douglas still referred to Borgnine as a gentleman, which might sound contradictory. He clarified that it wasn't hypocrisy, but complexity. Ernie was polite when he wanted to be, Douglas said with a wry smile. He knew how to charm a crowd, how to flatter a producer, how to win over a director. But if you were a young actor or a crew member who made a mistake, he could turn cold and cutting. That's why I call him both a gentleman and the rudest man ever worked with. He was both often in the same afternoon. Their professional paths crossed briefly in several Hollywood sets and share events. And Douglas remembered how Borgnine's moods could shift dramatically. One minute he'd have his arm around you locking like a schoolboy, and the next they'd be barking at someone to get out of his way. Douglas said he wasn't cruel for the sake of it. He just had no patience for what he considered redfolitions. But that lack of patience often made him seem arrogant. Douglas admitted that Borgnine personally reminded him of the old-school Hollywood men who came from hard backgrounds and carried their toughness like armor. Ernie was born in Connecticut, but his roots were Italian working class, Douglas explained. He'd been through the Navy, fought in World War II, and that shaped him. He didn't have the polished manners of a Cary Grant or the quiet diplomacy of a Gary Cooper. He was direct, sometimes too direct. That's what made him real, but also what made him rough. Despite their differences, Douglas never denied Borgnine's talent or heart. He was one of the finest character actors of his generation, Douglas said. He could play brutality and tenderness within the same breath. I just wish he had shown the same kindness off screen that Heckled so beautifully portray on it. He even recalled one incident that summed up their relationship. Once during a charity gala, Ernie snapped at a waiter for bringing him the wrong drink. He called him out on it right there. Hell looked at me for a long time, then broke into that big grin and said, "You're right, Kirk. I'm an ass sometimes." That was Ernie. Rude, but big enough to admit it. In his later years, Douglas reflected on how time softened even theurgist souls. When I saw him again, years before he died, he hugged me, Douglas said. He was gentle, kind, like an old lion who'd lost his roar. Their rudeness was gone. All that was left waste man beneath the bluster. A man who loved his craft, loved his friends. And maybe just didn't always know how to show it. To Kirk Douglas, Ernest Borgnine remained one of Hollywood's great contradictions. A man capable of both warmth and wrath, of generosity and gruffness. He was a gentleman whose some enemies forgot his manners, Douglas concluded. But in this business, that's not so rare. What made Ernie stand out was that for all his rudeness, you couldn't help but love him anyway. Kirk Douglas passed away on February 5, 2020 at his longtime home in Beverly Hills, California at the remarkable age of 103. His death marked the end of an era in Hollywood as Douglas was one of the last serving figures from the golden age of cinema. A true titan whose career spanned over 7 decades, the home where he died had been a place of peace and reflection in his latter years. Surrounded by family photographs, awards, and mementos of a life that had shaped American film history, Douglas had lived a full century and more, and his passing was not merely the death of an actor, but the closing of a monumental chapter in Hollywood's story. In his final years, Douglas had lived a relatively quiet life, though his presence remained deeply felt in both entertainment industry and philanthropic circles. Even after suffering a debilitating stroke in 1996, which severely affected his speech, he continued to appear publicly, deliver speeches, and advocate for causes close to his heart. The home in Beverly Hills, where he drew his last breath, was shared for over 6 decades with his wife, and Biden's a devoted companion who stood by his side through triumphs and tragedies. Their marriage, which lasted an extraordinary 65 years until his passing, was one of the most enduring unions in Hollywood, a testament to loyalty, resilience, and love amid fame's turbulence.